Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is our first infant and early childhood mental health lunch and learn event that is generously sponsored by the Utah Association for Infant Mental Health and the Department of Child and Family Studies at Weber State University. We're fortunate to have Michael Trout here speaking with us today. If you're not familiar with Michael and his work, he's a longtime therapist, the director of the Infant Parent Institute, and the author of a newly published book, 4 Decades in Infant Mental Health, This Hallowed Ground. It was published this year, 2021. Today, I'm going to ask that you keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. If you're comfortable and willing to keep your cameras on, it would be wonderful for Michael to be able to see an audience as opposed to a sea of black screens. Michael's going to lecture first, somewhere in the 30 to 45 minute range before welcoming questions, and then he will open up the discussion. If you have questions in the meantime that you'd like to put in the chat, you're welcome to, and I can pose them to Michael at the end of his talk. Alternatively, when Michael does welcome questions and comments, you can use the raise hand function to ask questions yourself and he can call on you. Really excited to say this is a local Utah event. If you're not familiar with the context of infant mental health going on in Utah, the UAIM group has been doing fantastic work for a long time here. I would encourage you to check out uaim.org, UAIMH.org, see how you can get involved. They are currently bringing infant mental health endorsement to this state. We also have an annual conference that has some really exciting speakers. Okay, Michael, you can take it away.
Thank you. I'm gonna make the screen as big as possible. Oh, your face has just got much larger. I can see details of some of your living rooms, fake or real as they may be. As Alex said, we will have discussion time for at least the last 30 minutes. And I just urge you to take that seriously. I very much want this to not be just a lecture this afternoon, but a real serious exchange about a serious and passionate matter in our field. Some of you know that I've written often about the best shot I can make at distilling what we all learned in infant mental health in the early years. Distilling child development, psychoanalysis, child psychoanalysis, and adult into the very, very simple concepts that include attunement, without which nothing works, nothing happens. Wondering, the key to scholarly inquiry. Following, and holding. And if you want to learn more about those, read any of my books or articles or look them up on your own. But today, we're going to focus on what some of you may find to be a nuanced part of infant mental health work. I find it to be central, and that is the holding relationship. I'll try to define it. I'll try to give examples of it, and I'll try to direct you to others who have spoken about it one way or the other. You may be interested to know, by the way, that that word has not been spoken about much in the developmental or even in the psychoanalytic literature as a key word in itself. So you may not find as much as you would hope to find if you just Google it. But the concept, I think, will come to have meaning to you today. And if it doesn't, I've really failed. Many of you know the story of Donald Winnicott being invited to sit with some folks at a care center out on the outskirts of London in the early 40s by a social worker by the name of Claire. The kids got there because they had been sent out of the city into one or another sort of foster care like arrangement, and it didn't work for them. And so they were given the bump from foster care and sent to this care facility. And there, bringing a big shot pediatrician and psychoanalyst like Donald Winnicott in made everyone think he surely have the answer to the behavior and developmental and even emotional problems of the kids residing there. And he frustrated the dickens out of all of them by doing this thing that didn't have a name then. Claire later gave it the name of holding. For the staff who were disappointed in his actions, it looked to them as if what he was really doing is just sitting and staring at the kids and staring at them and smoking his pipe and doing all kinds of analytic actions like rubbing his beard and so on. And that was it. What he later explained in very gracious but kind of demanding terms, that is to say, if you folks think you're going to get something out of me today that will be directive and that will tell you what to do with these kids to make them all better, you're going to be awfully disappointed, because I'm going to turn the camera back on you, so to speak. Because what I see around here is that when kids get better, it's because of the environment they're in. The environment is you. And Claire would later re-describe those words and those behaviors that he was alluding to as holding. He implied that the most important part of the treatment plan would be in the everyday interactions with the children that were marked by stability, the simple act of doing what you said you would do, showing up when you said you'd show up, stability and empathy, though not a speck of sentimentality. If you've read Winnicott much, you know he doesn't hold for sentimentality. Claire would later call all of these behaviors holding. And she would describe them this way. And I really hope you can reach deep into your heart and your mind while I read these couple of sentences, because they're not directly about infant mental health, but they are most directly about infant mental health. It'll take a little work on your part. So here are her words. We become, so to speak, a reliable environment, which is what they so much need, they being the children. Reliable in time and place. And we take great trouble to be where we have said we would be at the right time. We can hold the idea of the child in our relationship so that when he sees us, he can find that bit of himself which he has given us. One of the most profound statements in all of child psychoanalysis to me. This is conveyed by the way in which we remember details and know exactly where we left the child in our last interview with him. I've deliberately used the word hold in what I've been saying, because while it obviously includes acceptance of the child and what he gives us, it also includes what we do with what we accept. That's the end of the quote from Claire, who later became Claire Winnicott. At about this time, as some of you know, Dorothy Birmingham and Anna Freud were working in another war nursery where kids were sent mostly to get them out of the city, which was being bombed constantly. And it was a quite embarrassing and troubling discovery that they didn't do well in these places staffed by the likes of Anna Freud, for goodness sakes, and Dorothy Birmingham. And really no one knew why. Why were they not eating? Or, here was a hard one, why were they eating normal calories, normal amount of calories, but losing weight? Why were they lethargic? Why, if we'd been able to test them at the time, would their IQs have been going down? Freud and Birmingham decided to try an experiment that was novel and radical and weird at the time. It was nothing more than to give the children a little family. So they broke the large nursery into small units of 3 or 4 kids each and one primary caregiver who would, they didn't give her this name at the time, but who would be their mother, who would be their holder, who would be their stable, empathic figure round the clock. To you and I now, this would seem to be common sense. At the time, it was thought to be very weird. The result at first was that the place went a little bit berserk. And some of you, I think, could understand this. It was not that everybody got better right away. It's that everybody got noisy right away. They began to cry when their mother substitute merely left the room. That was experienced by the child as if she was leaving them. They began to cling at her. They began to duke it out with each other in the service of getting on her lap and so on. Keep in mind that when before this family structure was created, there was so much lethargy in the unit, in the nursery, that it was very quiet. Some might say better. Freud and Birmingham knew differently. And so when the children began to go nuts, they decided to just hold on tight and see what would happen. And what happened is that the children began to settle and began to develop what would be called by Freud for the very first time an attachment. No one quite knew whether the condition of chaos that had been created by giving these children what they needed was better or worse than the condition of lethargy that preceded it. But momentary chaos was not the end of the story. Within a couple of weeks, with the realization that their new mother substitute really belonged to them, reappeared as often as she disappeared, and had no intention to desert them altogether, the state of frenzy subsided. That's a quote from the War Years book, printed on that terrible paper we had during the war, entitled War and Children by Freud and Birmingham. The children had, in other words, been held, a state that had little to do with being touched and everything to do with being looked after by an available other who was sturdy enough to support an environment of safety and stability and certainty. None of this qualified as a specific strategy or even as a new theory of intervention with very young children, but it did seem to point to the possibility we're discussing today, that being there could be the most important part of treatment with lost children. It was consistent, this idea, with Winnicott's unrelenting assertion, very much in opposition to the perspectives of his psychoanalytic colleagues of the day, that what we do around children may be even more important than what we do to children. It was a perspective that continued throughout his career as he searched for ways to apply psychoanalytic theory to difficult situations where psychoanalysis itself would involve wasting our time and someone else's money. That's a direct quote. Imagine the furor at the time. Along came Selma Freiberg a few years later. She waltzed into the homes of blind children and their struggling mothers and fathers. The children were not developing. They were as much as 9 or 10 years old and still not crawling. They spent their days lying on the floor, usually on their faces, sometimes looking up, but oddly not reaching for objects and not moving to acquire objects. To you and I sitting here today, that sounds obvious. How could a blind child reach for an object that he didn't know was there? You and I would say. But at the time, we didn't understand that very well. We didn't know so much about object constancy. We didn't know that there comes a time in the life of a sighted infant, usually around 8 to 12 months, when he develops an idea of an object he has seen and maybe touched. He develops an idea of its existence when he can't see or touch it. It took Freiberg to wonder the important question, what happens when you have not seen the object or touched the object? So she set about to see what would happen, since she couldn't give the children sight with their eyes, to give them sight with their hands. She introduced objects into their hands. Eventually, one of those objects was her face. And she taught the children to stroke her face and know that object, that is the object of Selma Freiberg, to know it as a real thing, a thing that actually existed. One day she pulled one of the kids, a quite well-grown child, not a baby, up on her lap, and they were doing their thing. And when she began to put him down, their thing being his exploring the object, exploring her face. And as she began to put him down, he scratched her. She then pulled him back on her lap and he scratched her again. And he dug at her around her neck. When she put him down, the child squealed, as if in great distress. Whereupon the mother said, yeah, that's what he does. He's horrible. He's going to be just like the doctor said. He's going to get violent. You know, a lot of blind kids, they tell me, get violent. That's why the doctor says, I'm going to have to put him in an institution. He screams at me. He scratches me. He clutches at me. It's awful. Freiberg pulled the child back up on her lap again. He began to do it again. And this time, instead of putting him down, she said to him, you don't have to worry. I won't go away. And it got just about that quiet in the room, we were later told. A big thud. I don't think anyone knew that infant mental health was born on that day, until a little later in that same session with the same child and mother, when the mother pulled the child up on her lap, the child began to dig at her neck and scratch her. And Freiberg said, again, slightly different words, you don't have to worry, Peter. Mother will not go away. Mom was flabbergasted, not only by the strange connection that had just been made, but by how close to him, Peter, she began to feel after this simple interpretation. His behavior began to change. Her behavior began to change. Attachment got a boost. Mother later said to Freiberg, it was like magic that day. Mother and baby, I propose to you, had been held by our founder, Selma Freiberg, that day. It would be some years before we began to conceptualize the act of holding as a worthy element of early intervention, as in fact a necessary context for everything else we do in infant parent psychotherapy and in casework. We sometimes watched each other do it in sessions, but we didn't know what it was. We didn't have a name for it. We saw that magic and we didn't understand what our colleague or maybe even ourselves had done. The result of our not having a name for it and not being able to understand it really, not being able to get good supervision about it, because our supervisor may not have seen it or understand it either. The result was that we went through quite a few years where we abandoned it. and turned instead to emphasize diagnosing in infant mental health, guidance, teaching parenting skills, for goodness sakes, and engaging in other more easily repeatable behaviors while missing the element that just might give it all meaning, that might provoke healing. And it's a call back to that I'm making with you today. You may notice that we've gotten this far today without naming the behaviors that are associated with holding. And I'm doing that on purpose because I don't want you to ever imagine that I can give you a list of holding behaviors. And if you just carry them out, for goodness sakes, kids will get better and attachment will work better. It's not like that. Holding is a behavior, to be sure, but it's hard to name what it is because it's a contextual behavior. Holding is, to be sure, something we do, but it's not something we do according to a rule book. We don't even do it the same way each time. It's as finely tuned as any other disciplined, clinical, or casework intervention. It's guided in the moment by the specific patient or service user, which means that everything depends on our attunement to that particular patient, the child or the mother or both. According to Winnicott, a useful prototype for holding in the mother-child relation is the mother-child relationship itself, in which the mother first becomes sensitized to the baby by feeling herself in her infant's place. This deep empathy with the baby's predicament, Winnicott's words, creates a facilitating environment in which the infant may be able to be and to grow. And so that's how we must do our job of holding. What an awful thing I've put in your lap. What a mixed recipe it is. Any effort to nail down what holding is must include clarification about what it's not. For example, it is not the same as caring, which might easily be understood as an attitude or even as a personality trait. Oh, she's such a caring therapist. Well, that may mean she's good at holding, or it may not. Holding is not about being nice, as a thing in itself, at least. Indeed, some acts of holding may appear to be anything but nice. Under certain circumstances, the demands of holding may make us appear brutal, may make us constrain a certain child, may be confrontive with a certain parent. For example, I once listened as a teen mom in her very first session, described the living circumstance in the home she shared with her baby, her brothers, and her dad. Her mom had died a couple of years earlier. Almost as an aside, she mentioned that there was no door on her bedroom because her dad had taken it down. She didn't appear to be complaining about that or pointing it out as a problem, but I was put on alert. In a conversational style later in the session, she mentioned that she was hoping to see the father of her baby, also a teenager, that evening. She said that her dad said it was okay as long as, she. And I said, no, I don't know. As long as what? Well, that thing that he asked me to do sometimes. So it turns out that the deal they had made is as long as she gave him oral sex, her father, before going out on a date with the baby's father, it was okay. Her dad would approve. She didn't seem to be complaining about that either. She didn't seem to be beckoning anything from me. I didn't know what to do. I was near tears. I was agitated. I wanted to hold this young child. I found myself suddenly, however, in the presence of a different person than the one I thought I'd met just a few minutes earlier. Now I saw her as a kind of a raggedy victim, who also happened to be a child mother. There was precious little time to muse on this revelation, precious time for me to plan what in the world to do. Dad was coming home from his shift at the plant in just a few minutes. He'd be walking in the door. What was I going to do? And so I told her that I had a plan. And that was that the two of us were going to go down the street. There were no cell phones in those days, and call from a payphone to the hotline. And I was going to let them know that her father was sexually abusing her. She begged me not to do that. She said her father would be livid if he found out, and he was going to find out for sure. Dad was late, which gave us time to escape, and we made the phone call, and she listened in on it. It has to be one of the hardest and meanest things I've ever done. And I don't know to this day that I can justify doing it to you. But it was what I thought holding commanded on that day. There are times when holding must extend to the patient's or the service user's anger or to our own. Indeed, since our job is to attune to and hold whatever is there in the patient, we need to be prepared for a variety of profoundly negative transferences or even objective rage, and then we've got to know what to do with it. It's not that I'm saying we must volunteer to become anybody's punching bag, a child or an adult, but our work commands our agreement to temporarily stand with sturdy non-reactivity as a reliable hate object. How do you like that sentence? That is sometimes our job. A patient flails. A patient behaves figuratively, almost like an uncontained child, flailing arms and legs everywhere. And our job is to hold it. Sometimes holding requires that we take into our grasp, so to speak, into our hearts and into our minds, the culture of the person that we're with, the child and the parent or both. Maybe even the ancient culture of that family. Holding, after all, does ask us to remember what we've been told by the child or the parents and to express our memory in specific acts of holding care. In the process, we deeply compliment the patient, or the parent or the child, by recalling details that are important, not only to diagnosis and treatment, but are important to the person. And so if we've committed to that, we're committed to knowing and remembering everything that has happened to this child or this parent's family and culture, maybe going back, shall we say, 300 years. Are we up for that? Are we up for taking that into account when we watch the parent behave in a certain way? Or when we hear the parent or the child express a certain feeling? Can we put it in the context of their ancient culture, their traditions, their learnings? For example, if we're faced with a suicidal Native Alaskan child, would we commit to remembering what we know or should know before we wade in? Would we take care to spot his great-grandfather in the crowd of children that we saw in a photograph on the wall of the family's home? One of those in front of the residential school that white, arrogant people built and required that great-grandfather of this little child to go to a long, long time ago, humiliating the family introducing loss and terror and trauma into the family. Would we be able to keep that in mind? Would we be able to conceptualize, as part of our mentalizing efforts on behalf of the parent or the child, would we be able to conceptualize what unnameable, centuries-old sorrow the child might now be bearing? Because if we can't hold this Native Alaskan child in this way, including holding the story of his culture, then I maintain we can't help him. A young Alaskan boy tries to hurl himself off a ledge during a deep wilderness experience to which he was referred after persistent failures to reach him with standard mental health treatment. He's been tagged with oppositional defiant disorder and has been both beaten and sexually molested by his alcoholic father. He's episodically mute and regularly engages in both violence against others and self-cutting. He's tackled in the middle of his suicidal jump by a gifted young psychologist whose name, and this is why I know the story, whose name is Trout, my youngest boy, whose questions are shaped by mindful awareness of the world from which this boy came, going back 200 years, and a dedication on the part of this young psychologist to holding all of it. Clutching the boy tightly, this young therapist in the woods began a strange holding inquiry, the kind that demonstrates a devotion to the soul of a child who can't even name what's the matter, why he feels so tortured that he wants to kill himself that night. The therapist's words are these: "What happened to you? What happened to your heart? What happened to your people?" The conversations with this boy and his family in the days following his attempt to end an unnameable pain through suicide will not be about proper diagnosis, but about the countless losses in their culture and the rediscovery of ancestral stories, hopes, and values. The clinician knows just enough about the culture and this family to guess that no one has talked about their sorrow in generations. His reactions to the boy and to the suicide attempt make clear that he's prepared to hold everything they've got to say, the whole story. Evidently, it's time for that story to be told, and of all things, to a white boy, my son. Foster and adoptive parents know all about holding, since it is not infrequently the only thing they can do in the face of a raging child, or a child who's just eaten most of the contents of the freezer in the middle of the night, or a child who seems intent on establishing that no one matters to him. I watched a foster mother once give a preeminent place to holding a child who seemed intent on rejecting all overtures. But mom knew that and accepted that because she had carefully imagined the heart of her little girl as a first order of business, figuring out what form her devotion should take with this particular child. From this mom, I learned that holding is not a catch-all, that it is not tactical, that it is shaped by a fine knowing of this one child. By definition, holding is finely honed because it's based on a relationship and on deep mentalization of the other. It only counts if the child feels the power of it because it targets her particular soul. if it arises out of someone's profoundly intimate awareness of the nature of her wound. It works if it arises out of mind sight, to use Siegel's word, a capacity to see the internal world of self and others. I can't explain why this particular foster mother, certainly without a speck of psychoanalytic training, could look inside a hurt child she had only known for a few days and discern just what to do. Nothing fancy, just a sweet, straight to the core of things response that staggers anyone watching it and anyone receiving it with the accuracy of its aim, the grandness of its simplicity. Chelsea's first mom had, just a few days before the session I'm describing to you here with the foster mother, had murdered Chelsea's brother in front of Chelsea and then called the cops from a neighboring trailer and blamed Chelsea for it. Chelsea spent the night in a crisis nursery and then was taken into care with this foster mom. She had by then gone mute. She wouldn't let anyone touch her. She wouldn't come into the room where I was making a home visit. She didn't want anyone to have anything to do with her. She sat on the top of the stairs. We were in the kitchen, clutching at the railing on the stairs. It was my first home visit. This brilliant mom, foster mom, because she knew how to hold, said, let's go outside. She might be happier out there. We did, and Chelsea followed. Whereupon, she scared me to death by climbing on her tricycle and riding out into the street. I was sure foster mom, knowing I was a big shot, sent in probably to investigate what was going on here. She had to say and do the right thing in front of me. No, that didn't matter. Only thing that mattered to this mom at this moment was holding Chelsea. So she went into the street after her. And let me get the quote here. She went into the street after her, and instead of lecturing her, she said, and I quote, "Oh no, my dear. In this house, little girls are not allowed to be hurt or to hurt themselves. In this house, little girls get protected by their mommies." And then she guided that precious, tortured child back to the yard. That's holding. And I was standing 20 feet away, barely able to contain my sobs, because I'd seen magic. I'll forever hold that foster mom in my heart in a place of honor. So I've tried to propose to you a novel, common sense, sturdy, believe it or not, psychoanalytically rooted intervention that wraps itself around everything else we're doing, but only if we let it. Only if we become very good at it. Only if we set other things like our strategy du jour, or our diagnostic work, or our typing in our computer, only if we set all that aside and devote ourselves to this thing of holding. It's torturous. It's difficult. It leaves us not knowing what we're going to do as we drive up to the house on a particular day. And it's scary because our supervisor probably won't like it. Our funding agent may not like it because we're supposed to be doing things that can be written down and described with more precision. We're supposed to keep fidelity to a model of intervention in many cases. So I thought I would just end with the most remarkable quote in our own infant mental health journal, which I hope all of you are reading, from Beth Green at Portland State. She says this: first, and perhaps most fundamentally, the field, that is us, our field, needs to set aside the notion that fidelity, implementation of a model as intended, can be equated with quality. She then adds, fidelity assumes that providing the same service in the same way to all families will lead to improved outcomes. Well, I'm of an age and a temperament, I suppose, that makes looking back inevitable. I know that I would take little encouragement by testifying to you that I had retained fidelity to rote implementation of a strategic model in my 45 years of infant mental health practice, no matter how evidence-based it was. I suppose I could feel like I had been a good boy, and it might make me more attractive to funding agents, but I couldn't do it. And Beth Green, I owe a debt to for reminding me that we don't have to, because there are larger things to do. I know how I'll measure my years of service. I struggled for fidelity, all right, but it was fidelity to the demands of attunement. It was a struggle to hold just so each baby and each parent, as they allowed me and as they taught me I must. Freiberg, and you would know this if you knew her, I hope some of you did, Freiberg taught us to not be good boys and girls. She was a cantankerous thing, but to instead be respectful, not of a method, but of the patient in front of us, the mother or the father or the baby. In my career, did I get even close to the sort of mindsight she demonstrated so effortlessly? Or by the ingenuity and devotion of the foster mom I just told you about? These are the answers I seek now in my old age. Did families feel seen by me? If you could find a few of them right now, how would they answer this question? Did Mr. Trout understand you? Did you, this afternoon, feel held as you put yourself in the position of therapist or caseworker or parent or very young child in any of the examples I offered? Did you remember this afternoon times in your life when you were held, when you were held, or times you longed to be, either one of which might assure you that you know exactly what I'm talking about? If so, I believe it's very much in your power to make holding central to the work you do every day. So I hope that was sufficiently provocative that you've loaded up the chat line with questions, or you're ready to raise your hand and ask them directly. Alex will help with being kind of a moderator here. So let's have it. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Folks, you're welcome to raise your hand and Michael can call on you and you can turn on your mic to ask the question, or if you'd like to put it in the chat, I can raise that question for you.
By the way, if you didn't already discern it from picking up on elements of my temperament and my nature, you're going to lose if they're going to set up a contest between who can stare the longest. So let's just get going. Let's ask your questions, because I'll wait.
We have some comments with appreciation so far. Now, Michael, I could kick this off with a question that will bring up some discussion, which is that we have a lot of students in the audience.
Oh,
Some of them are students who will go on to do home visiting. Some will go on to be clinicians. Some will go on to be teachers. So I wondered if, well, we do have a question that'll be here in just a moment, but what would you offer to these folks who are really just starting out their career?
oh goodness. Don't listen to me. Or you'll be in a world of trouble with your supervisor. But another way of saying that is, gosh, look to find the best supervisor you can possibly find, and someone who thinks, if this afternoon engaged you at all, who thinks this way, who thinks maybe even the way you do, who seems to really have a heart, who seems to be curious about you, who seems interested in holding you in supervision so that you can hold the families that you work with. I would find it very tough to be a student right now, because the world has moved in a direction of repeatability and evidence-based practice and all other things, most of which are just code words for using strategy instead of true psychotherapy.
We do have a hand raised. Do you want to call on folks,
Oh,
Michael?
sure. Sorry, I can't see them.
Oh, that's okay. Ilse, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, first of all, I really want to thank you for this wonderful presentation, and I'll give you a little bit of background of who I am so you have context. So I am one of the founding members of the Utah Association for Infant Mental Health, and I have one foot still in university life. So I teach at the psychology department, I teach infant development, and I also work with parents, mostly on the phone, for a place called Help Me Grow Utah. And it's been interesting to see this tension between, teaching about the science and then working with parents and actually finding, that the most important thing is to be present with each parent and getting to know each child and seeing how that parent can connect to that child in that moment. My question, okay, no. Also, through having more experience, it has struck me too, this need, you said, to be a reliable hate object. And I think this is so important because I'm noticing so much that parents have a really hard time holding these strong emotions of their toddlers, the tantrums, the anxiety, the whining. They can't hold it. They said, I need it to stop. It needs to stop. and it triggers them a lot. But my question is mostly, so I come from, I love Winnicott. I adore Winnicott and this whole background. I'm trained in Zen Buddhism, which has given me this training in staying present. But I'm also noticing it's an art. And so it is, I would love for all infant mental health workers to do the work that you do. However, I don't think we can without the proper training. And especially being that hate object is so triggering for all of us. So my question is, what is necessary, do you think, to train people to offer that holding?
Gosh, what a wonderful question. Complicated question. And I won't give you the usual response, even though if we had enough time, I would, which is that we've all got to do our own work, because I don't want you to misinterpret that that I'm saying we need to clear out our own closets and get all well and fine before we can do infant mental health work. I don't even believe that's true. I do believe it's true that we've got to know ourselves. We have to be held, have to have been held, or if we weren't very well, we have to be held now in order to go into somebody's home and hold them. So if I'm going to be a reliable hate object for somebody, I better know where I stand on hate directed at me when I was a little boy, on the bullying that I experienced in grade school, on the rage that my mother would express in passive aggressive ways, on the rage that my father would express when he was drunk, and so on. I better have at least visited all those planets. I don't have to have it all straightened out. I don't have to be all well about it. I don't even have to be completely above hate myself or anger. I don't. But I have to know, have visited those places enough to be able to at least say, when a mother is saying to me, as evidently they have to you, I can't stand it when he, speaking of their toddler, and express hate toward the toddler, and express that the toddler is full of it. And you see that maybe the mother is really also saying, and I'm getting full of it too, full of hate and rage. We at least have to have done enough work with ourselves to be able to not react, to stay calm, and to say something incredibly brilliant. I'm being facetious here, like, of course you are. I can't imagine COVID and this child and you in a room with no one else for 18 months. I can't imagine. How have you done it? To begin at least with that expression of empathy, not very complicated. And then allow the parent to blow if they wish, with the assurance on our face that whatever the parent is saying is, we're sturdy enough to take it. We express clearly what our boundaries are. I'm not going to let you hit me, but I don't know that we really have to say those words. For some reason, I just thought of coming up on a porch where a father was standing with a, I don't remember, it was a shovel or a broom or something, but was threatening me with it. I better not enter his porch. And I don't know how it would be for the rest of you, but all I had to do, it was not a brilliant intervention at all. It was just to follow the rules I just laid out here by reimagining him, by mentalizing him until I could see there on that porch what I would later learn was in fact the case, which was a crying child in the form of this rough-hewn daddy with the shovel in his hand, threatening the shrink who'd come to do God knows what to his family. He was instead, in my eyes at that moment, a crying child who may have been bullied by his dad, who may have been pushed around by lots of caseworkers before me that I don't know anything about, who feels threatened, who wants to take care of his family. And right now, ironically, I'm the biggest threat to his family being taken care of. Maybe I'm in addition, and I don't even know this yet, because I haven't even met these people yet. Maybe I'm a threat to his manhood. Maybe, to go back to the Alaskan example, maybe a bunch of white people that looked a lot like Michael Trout came to his great-grandpa's house and took all the babies and sent them off to residential school and made his great-grandfather feel like not a man, which is, by the way, when his great-grandpa turned into an abuser himself of his wife, when in fact in that village and in that culture, men didn't abuse their wives until white people came in and took their babies. Huh. See how complicated it gets? But we don't have to know all that. We just have to be able to imagine for a moment an angry father with a shovel in his hand on the front porch crying, being a crying child. Does that help even a little, Ilsa?
Thank you very much. It does, and it highlights also. You probably know this, and you know this, but not everybody in the call knows this. How reflective supervision now is a support for that. What you're talking about, creating a holding environment for the professional. Thank you very much.
You just provoked one other thought. The end of this story would be that you get in your car and drive down the road and pull over, probably, where you may shake, or you may cry, or you may curse, and you're allowed to do all those things. You're not a bad infant mental health clinician if you do any of those things. And then you go back to the office and you let your supervisor know, I need some time. If you've got a good one, that is. I need some time. I need to tell you what just happened and what I was faced with and how I felt that hate come into me. And at first I didn't know what to do. That's the sequelae of such a session. All right.
Michael, we have a couple questions in the chat along the lines of, what are some of the things you could do when you first encounter a family that maybe holding didn't come so easily to the mother as in one of your stories? How do you build a relationship with the parents?
Well, of course, Freiburg one lesson was simple and clear and was early in our training. Your job is to hold the mother so that she can hold her child. So that didn't make as a prerequisite that mother has already been held by somebody else when she was little, or that mother's adequate in any respect whatsoever. It only spells out what you need to do. So you do that with your eyes, you do that with the way you sit, you do that with the way you mentalize with her in the moment and feed that back to her. Boy, you know a lot about babies who, or even if the only thing she has to say is, excuse the language, this goddamn kid is driving me bunkers, and if he doesn't stop, I'm going to blank. Maybe the only thing you can say is, boy, you know a lot about what happens when kids upset their mommies. Whoa. Do you realize what we just opened up there? We didn't do anything fancy, but we just may have accidentally opened up mommy's story about another mommy that got really, really upset with a child. And that child was the mommy that we're sitting with now. And that's how this mommy knows so much about mommies who get so upset by their babies that they want to hurt them. And maybe if we get incredibly lucky, she'll let us go there a little bit. Maybe she'll hear the implication of that soft statement. You seem to know a lot about mommies whose babies make them crazy. Maybe she'll let us in. Maybe she won't. Maybe she won't till next week or weeks from now. Maybe she'll test us 100 ways to Sunday. But our job remains the same. We just be steady and stable, and we keep reflecting, and we keep offering, so to speak, offering our holding selves. Can you see my hands here? We don't do that, but we do that, just not with our arms.
Had another question in the chat that relates to what you just shared about implicitly having the mother or giving the mother an opportunity to reflect on her own experiences. Someone asked, how do you help adults consider that they are bearing another generation's trauma?
Oh, previous generation. Oh my goodness, yeah. And the context for the question we'll have to remember is that we assume nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to revisit the trauma of their elders, of previous generations, or even their own when they were little. We're not built that way. We may remember a lot of stuff that happened to us when we're little. We may even remember the stories our father or mother told us about when they were little, but mostly we don't want to mess with that stuff. It's icky and scary. And there's the possibility that we not only don't remember it, we have dissociated from it if we witnessed it. So we just don't want to go there. That's the context. So I'm taking a little extra time to say all that. So I make sure we don't just wade in and think that we can do some clever intervention that will make people want to talk to us about the trauma of their own past and their ancestors' past, because they're not. And we need to accept that and love and appreciate that fact. Even to the point where we would say to ourselves, why would anyone want to do that? Why would anyone want to remember awful stuff that happened to themselves? We start there. And having started there now, we're situated properly. We can now hold. And we just poke. We just look. Maybe a mom says, I know what people like you are up to. You're always just trying to poke around and get me to say things. I tell you what, my mom was a good mom. She loved me and nothing ever happened to me. Jeez. So we accept that. But no, we don't. We accept it in the moment, lovingly and empathically, but we know there's more to the story. And so we just wait and we look and we poke. And I'll tell you, with that particular mom, the breakthrough came when I said, sort of in desperation, I have to admit, because she did not want to talk to me. I asked her what that photo album was there under the coffee table I spotted. I said, would you show that to me? I'd love to know what you looked like when you were little. And so she did. And lo and behold, it always happens, I tell you. We get to a particular photo that either I sense is a special photo, or her breathing changes, or her posture changes. Something cues me, oh, it's that one in the upper left. Look at that one. And so we do. And in this particular case, there was a man's arm in the photo reaching for the little girl, this mom when she was little. And I asked, who was that? And she said, oh, my dad. I said, oh, I thought you said your dad was gone. Well, and now begins the story. Well, he left, but I didn't care. And don't you be making a big thing out of that just because he left. And what else happened? Well, mom didn't want him to leave. So she left. For how long was she gone? I'm thinking a day or two she left hunting the father. 2 years. What happened to you and your little brother that you'd mentioned to me earlier in that 2 years? Oh, we stayed with an aunt. And then what happened? Well, mom came back and took us back from the aunt, and then we started life again. And I don't want you, what's that look on your face? God, I hate it when people like you have that look on your face like, oh, well, that's a really sad story. I hate it when you look that. I said, I'm sorry for the look on my face. I'm just thinking. Do you remember when you first were sent to me by child welfare? It was because you put your own 2-year-old in foster care. And then you took off for a long time. And then you came back and got her out, and none of us knew why you had done that, because you had been a pretty good mom and there was no real risk. And I noticed that you were 2 when your child, was 2 when that happened. And I noticed that in this picture, you're 2. When your dad left, you were 2. When your mom left, you were 2. And so now we're going. So that's not a very good answer to your question, because I haven't said, say these 4 things or ask these 3 questions and you'll get there, because we just can't know. We just have to be situated, calm, ready, open, and we have to nudge in where we can, always remain empathic and curious and see what happens.
I had a question, someone asking more about the teen mom that you worked with who was being sexually assaulted by her father. This person asked to say more about how you went about decision making in that moment. You made that decision to go make a call.
Oh my goodness. I love the question because it makes it sound like I just pondered it, or I had the leisure to consider it. That's the booger in our work sometimes, isn't it? We have to be able to think on our feet. And the result, by the way, often is that we'll make mistakes. Often. But I can't tell you that I had enough data to make that decision. I just knew that a 17-year-old girl who was also a mother had just told me something that I found horrifying. And maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have been calmer about that. Maybe I should have waited till she could tell me the rest of the story. Like, how long has this been going on, or something? All I knew was that there was no mother there to protect her. She was the oldest child. She already had mentioned earlier that, as a joke, that she had kind of taken her mother's place after her mother died in the family. All I knew is that I thought I had to get her out of there or get her protected. Was I ready? What if Dad had not been late? What if Dad had walked in before we could get out? Was I ready for that? What was I going to do then? I didn't know the answers to those things. I just thought a precious child needed holding, and that's all I could think of at the moment. Tremendous, horrible risk. And not even one, by the way, that pleased the precious child.
I have a student who asked, how do you see signs of a child that needs to be held? Maybe they're not so explicit as I'm experiencing sexual assault.
Specifically about sexual assault, eh? That's the question.
No, I was just saying, maybe they're not so explicit as knowing that sexual assault is happening.
Oh, I see.
How might you know that a child is in need of that kind of holding?
Yeah. And let me complicate things further, because one of the children that came to mind when you asked that question is a child very typical in my practice, particularly during the years I saw a lot of patients at the office, who would demand holding, who would rush up to me immediately, oh, and leap up into my arms. So I would include in the question children who give no sign that they need to be held, and children who give really weird signs that they want to be held, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to hold that child. I'm not even going to be alone with that child. I'm going to want to know how it feels to this probably adoptive or foster mother or father to watch this child leap into my arms when I know perfectly well that their story is that she won't leap into theirs. So it's very complicated how we make those decisions. But I guess the best answer I can give at the moment is that we just watch. We just do the best we can at mentalizing the child. If the child acts aloof, let's say, and is just playing with toys over on the side and won't engage with us at all, and we just say, you like that tractor? And instead of responding to our statement, he says, I'm going to take it home. We would say, oh, are you? And then he says, yeah, I'm going to steal it. And we pause. Hopefully we got 2 seconds to ponder this before our next intervention, we wondered to ourselves, could he be asking me what I'm going to do if he steals my tractor? Could he actually not be threatening me? Could he just be saying, I wonder what you'll do if I take your toy? Will you be mad at me? And I'll maybe say something like that. I maybe will say, a lot of children come in here and they play with my toys, and sometimes they want to take my toys. Are you wondering if I'd be mad at you? And then just see what that produces. Because my guess is that statement, I'm going to take this, may be a request for holding. Maybe a way of saying, when I have taken things before, I've gotten punished, or I've gotten hurt, or maybe it has nothing to do with taking. I'm just testing out what it would take to get you to hurt me. And so I'm guessing that child needs holding. The short version of that answer is a terrible answer, which is we guess. Sometimes mentalizing is guessing. And we send out trial balloons and then we wait to see.
We have a question from Nathan, has his hand raised.
Hi, thank you. This is a wonderful presentation. Thank you. I've just started working with children and adolescents and their families this past year. I'm a candidate at a psychoanalytic institute.
Huh.
And I recently went to a training that terrified me, in which a psychologist presented his manualized model of how to treat childhood anxiety, which involved not even treating the child, but the parents, and bringing the parents in and going through their day and creating a list of all of the times in their day where the child's behavior or anxiety was difficult for them and that they had to accommodate that child. And then the treatment involves, over the course of the next several weeks to months, gradually over time, systematically reducing the accommodations that the parents make to the child, and basically conditioning any externalizing response out of this child. And I was horrified by this treatment. And maybe that treatment's successful in getting the symptom reduction that they can measure and report back. But what does it do to the child? And what does it teach that child? And what do they do with that anxiety, which is probably symbolic of something else? So I guess my question is, this is what we're up against in our field. And you already said that you're a bit of a cantankerous, like you're like Sonia Freiberg, and I'm just wondering how can we be cantankerous, and how can we fight against this this is where our field is, and it just seems like a mountain.
I was picturing tidal wave before you said the word mountain. Yes.
Well, there is a book that's actually called the Cbt Tsunami. So interesting, it talks about it, but it feels like a tsunami, yeah, a tidal wave.
Well, I don't have a good answer to your question, because all I know, I was raised in a Quaker town, Richmond, Indiana. And so excuse me if this is excessively Quaker, but all I know to do is the simple things and the one-on-one things. I know how to be a good clinician in my community and hope that the guy you're talking about sees it, or another parent tells him about it, and he gets curious, and we have coffee and we duke it out, and we probably don't come to any conclusion at all, but we at least can be empathic with each other for a moment. That'll have no effect whatsoever on the universe of people like this guy. or all the other strategy-based methodologies, the evidence-based practices that really amount to reducing to the lowest common denominator and engaging in fundable behaviors and repeatable behaviors, it won't change that world at all. So what kind of a crummy answer am I giving you, Nathan? I'm only saying what I think we can do in soft, quiet ways in our communities and hope that people are interested in that. And meanwhile, we don't lambast people like this. We don't get angry about it. In fact, we say maybe there's room for lists and strategies like that, as long as we remember that the relationship is at the heart of everything. So maybe once we're there and we have a relationship and we're really holding the family, we know them, maybe we can mess around with all sorts of behavioral interventions. You might be interested to know, before I learned psychoanalysis, I was trained as a behaviorist. So I know that stuff and I'm pretty good at doing it. And my kids will tell you I'm a stickler for detail and I'm kind of rigid. And so, boy, how can all that be true all at once? I think it can be true all at once in my family, and I think it can be true in interventions, that your main target is to hold, and you can mess with other things in that context. So I'm looking at my clock, Alex. So you?
Yeah, we are at time.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Michael. And we really appreciate having you and grateful for your time. For those of you who've been here, we will have the recording available for you to review as soon as possible. And I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you all. It's been a delight to be with you.